Thank you for inviting me today. As Jonathan said, my name is Chris Webb. I was the former head of news at the Metropolitan Police Service. Had quite an interesting career, was there for 23 years. And during that time, I dealt with almost every major incident and crisis to impact on London, everything from bombings, train crashes, plane crashes. I was even asked to look after the Asian tsunami and the impact on the United Kingdom of that, and the death of the Princess of Wales in Paris as well. What I've noticed over the years, and I dealt with my first major incident in 1987, was how things have significantly changed. It was quite easy in the 1980s to deal with major incidents. You only had 12 daily newspapers, breakfast news programmes, 3 TV news bulletins per day, and the news environment was changing every 6 hours, so you had time on your side. Jump forward 10 years, we get the introduction of the 24-hour news channels, Sky, BBC, and even ITN originally. And even then, although you had rolling news, even then, actually you still had time on your side because they had to get outside broadcasting units to the scene, camera crews, reporters to the scene, and the news was changing about every hour. Jump forward 20 years to actually now and beyond, and we've had this explosion of social networking sites and digital platforms. We've now got citizen journalists with mobile camera phones who can actually take images. The media are now using more and more, much more new public-generated material to fill their news programmes. And at the height of a major incident, the actual news is actually changing every 20 seconds as newsrooms get more information, more pictures, more videos. And that's a real challenge. That's a real challenge not only for the police service, but it's a real challenge for other government organisations and non-government organisations. The biggest turning point for me was the events of 9/11. And following the attacks in America, I was asked by the Minister for London, Nick Rainsford, to actually have a look at whether London could actually deal with a multi-sited terrorist incident. And whilst we had good plans in place to deal with static events, one-off events like plane and train crashes, the reality was if we were faced with something on the scale of 9/11, our plans were not fit for purpose. So we started a major review. We actually talked to people, we took evidence, we looked at existing plans, we looked at the lessons learned from 9/11, and we actually came up with 32 recommendations as a result of that. I'm not going to go through all those recommendations today, but there were 2 significant events or 2 significant recommendations that have actually supported the way we deal with major incidents in the future. It's interesting to listen to the panel discussion about there needs to be greater collaboration, because that was one thing that was lacking prior to 9/11. So one of the things we put in place was actually structures and systems for greater collaborations with different organisations. Again, one of the things that worked well in America was the multi-agency media centre that they set up on the docks in New York. So the greater collaboration plans that we put in place, we established something called a Gold Communications Group, which is a strategic communications group. And I had the privilege of chairing that group for 10 years. They were the organisations that made up that group. We put in systems whereby the group could actually share information very, very quickly via pager, text or email. And we could actually then follow up with conference calls. So that was a coordinating group actually about sharing information at times of crisis quickly and effectively. Now I'm going to talk to you now about the events of the 7th of July. What you've got to bear in mind, in 2005, there were no social or digital media platforms. We didn't have Twitter. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have other social media platforms. They didn't exist. How much we've moved in the last 10 years. How far have we come? We have not had a mass fatality major incident in the United Kingdom on the scale of 7/7 where social media has actually played a part. And I think if we get one in the future, then the authorities are going to be severely tested. I really, really do. And I have real fears and concerns about organisations' abilities to be able to do with a mass fatality incident in the future. But before we get to the 7th of July, we need to look at the 6th of July. And that was a really big day. from a news gathering perspective. We had the GH Summit at Glen Eagles in Scotland. We had the 2012 Olympic announcement in Singapore. And news crews were quite stretched. They had camera crews, reporters in Scotland, in Singapore, in Trafalgar Square, in other parts of the United Kingdom, to actually report on the events of the 6th of July. That actually played quite a significant part to how we actually responded to the bombings on the 7th of July. I remember the 7th of July. It was a great morning. It was like this morning. Beautiful sunny day. The newspapers were full of the announcement that London had won the Olympics. The breakfast news programmes, again, interviews, facilities at various locations about the 2012 Olympics. And you had actually going on in the background then stuff about the GH Summit in Glen Eagles. Got into the office about 8 o'clock. What we do every morning is we actually review what's happened overnight, review the cuttings, and we have a morning meeting at 9 o'clock to actually look at what's happened overnight, what's in the papers we need to deal with, what's happening today. And we're in the process of that meeting, and about 7 minutes past 9, the duty officer from the press bureau came in, whose name happened to be Alistair Campbell, and he's no relation, but he has since worked at Downing Street. He came in and said, we've got an incident going on at Aldgate Underground Station. It seems to be quite significant. It's a possible explosion. I said, okay, right. So the press office were actually trying to find out more information. At that point, I activated the first alert system. So I sent a message to the other partners on that structure I showed you previously to tell them we've got an incident at Aldgate Underground Station. We issued our first statement at 9:24, so within 17 minutes, we'd put out our first press statement. And that's what we said, very basic, factual at the time. I pride myself that the one thing the Met is good at, we don't get into this bureaucratic clearance process for statements. You know, responsibility on the main is actually given to press officers. I cleared that statement because it was a factual statement that was what we were doing at the time. It hadn't gone out this bureaucratic chain of command where people were dotting the I's and crossing the T's. I then shared a conference call at 9:25 with the other partner agencies to find out what they knew, what was going on. As I said, in 2005, getting information out there was quite basic. That's a picture of the old press bureau, how things have actually moved on. But we only had 4 ways of doing it: by telephone, dealing with press inquiries, emails, through the Press Association and other news agencies, and on our website. By 9:40, we were now getting reports coming in of other incidents on the underground network. And we knew something big was happening, but we didn't know what. And Transport for London were telling us that actually it was due to a power surge. There had been a massive power surge on the network that had caused a number of localised explosions at junction boxes, trains to stop in tunnels, and some trains to derail. At that point, I implemented the departmental major incident plans, because what that does, it gives certain responsibilities. We can actually move people around. So, for example, as part of our plan, different branches within the department had different roles and responsibilities. So I could actually close down the marketing and advertising department and use those staff and move them into different roles and responsibilities. By 9:44, all underground services were suspended. A decision was made to close down the entire underground network, and people were being evacuated, which was fine. But what you had were tens of thousands of people on the streets of the capital with absolutely nowhere to go. At 9:45, the Press Bureau were alerted to a substantial number of injured, 800 plus, and every hospital in London was now on alert to receive casualties from the different incidents. And then we had the breaking news, which changed everything. My colleagues are now going to actually show you a video clip of how this actually broke on Sky Television.
Because of the underground crisis, and it is also possible, British Transport Police are saying, that 2 trains are stuck in tunnels at Edgware Road, and there could still be passengers on board. We know passengers have smashed windows of tube trains with umbrellas to get out.
Let's talk to one of our producers, Bob Mills, who's in Russell Square this morning. Bob, talk us through what you've seen.
Well, what I'm seeing is a lot of very, very frightened people. As you know, tube stations throughout London were being evacuated. Thousands of people pouring out of King Cross Station and Euston Station, and I was one of those that had to be evacuated, walking towards Russell Square, and suddenly a huge explosion on the street up in front of me, and all I could see was the top of a bus completely destroyed. We all heard an explosion. And everything just disappeared in front of me, and I'm looking at people with blood injuries and walking away from the scene. The police are already there, taping off the entire area, so no one is completely sure what has happened. But as far as I'm concerned, a bomb has gone off, or something has exploded on a bus in Russell Square, and there must be some considerable injuries. And the whole place, people are streaming away from it. But as everybody is saying to me, we can't go down to the tubes, we can't walk up the street. Where on earth do we go?
Bob, because we've been told by London Transport that there have just been power outages, we need to be absolutely clear about what you're saying. Take us through again exactly what happened and the timings of that.
This was about 10 minutes ago. I was walking up the street, heard a loud explosion, and the next thing I saw was people running towards me saying a bomb has gone off in a bus, or at least a bus, the top of a bus, has exploded.
Because of the underground crisis, and it is also possible, British Transport Police are saying, that two trains...
That changed everything. As you heard there, what the media were reporting was power surges, power outages on the network. Although we suspected it might be terrorism, once we got that, we knew that actually we were dealing with terrorism. And that is the most frightening position to be in, because what we didn't know was, how many more attacks are we going to get? Where are those attacks going to be? So at that point, we believe there were 6 explosions in London, 5 at those underground stations, 1 on a bus in Tavistock Square. Again, I authorised the release of another statement, which was what we said there: emergency services responding to reports of multiple explosions at various locations. And I did a second conference call with partners. And at that, we agreed that we were going to set up a multi-agency media centre at the QE2 in Westminster. We weren't going to have dedicated locations at each site. We would just have one point of contact, and that was going to be at the QE2, and that the Government's News Coordination Centre was going to be established. By 11:10, there was a great fear that the mobile telephone system was going to collapse because of the demands being made on the network. There was actually discussions about whether we should turn the network off, because the police do have the capability with the providers to be able to do that. By 11:15, the Commissioner was on his way to Millbank to actually start interviews live into various news programmes. Again, the learning from 9/11 was, don't expect the media to come to you in a crisis, because they will not be able to get through the traffic. Take your spokesperson to where the media are. And for us, Millbank was actually an ideal location. At 11:30, I shut the door in my office, and I actually put together a communication strategy. We had good major incident contingency plans, but experience has taught me that you need a strategy for dealing with the events that are going on now. So I sat down, 10 minutes, set out aims and objectives on one side of A4 paper, and that was it. What we were dealing with at that time, and we developed that strategy over the coming hours and days. Again, these are the sorts of statements that were going out. 11:40, don't travel, go in, stay in, tune in. By 12 o'clock, we had designated spokespeople into the lunchtime news programmes. I chaired a roundtable communications group at 12 o'clock. The purpose of that group is not to look at press lines. That is a strategic group. That looks at the strategic issues that are impacting on the response, and also where we want to be in 3 hours' time, 6 hours' time, and 12 hours' time. I had press officers, capable press officers, dealing with the tactical response, preparing the press lines. I was looking after the forward-facing, the strategic overview. One of the things we decided at that meeting was that the media could actually use or have access to the CCTV cameras around London that are used for traffic purposes, for news reporting purposes because they didn't have enough crews. They had run out of crews because of where people were in Scotland and Singapore. By 1 o'clock, the media centre opened at the QE2. Again, just to flavour some of the statements we were issuing, this was about actually telling parents that we were in touch with local authorities, and if they had childcare arrangements, not to worry, because schools would actually keep hold of those children until they arrived home. By 2 o'clock, the Press Bureau was completely overwhelmed by the number of calls it was getting, and I made a decision that we would no longer deal with interview requests or facility requests from foreign broadcasters. They would actually be pointed in the direction of their sister organisations in London for that sort of material and footage. We did a joint emergency services press briefing with the chief officers from the ambulance, police and fire service at 3, and at that we were able to confirm there were 33 fatalities, 700 people injured, that the casualty bureau was open. We confirmed for the first time that there was an act of terrorism, and we started to tell people to start making their way home, although there was no underground system. So people either had to walk or there were very few buses that were available to actually get their way home. And again, that's another fear we had to confront. At that point, we knew there was going to be millions of people on the streets of London. Were the terrorists clever enough to actually launch another wave of attacks later on that day? We had to prepare with that. We had to have that in the back of our mind. Updated the statement at 6, saying there were now 37 fatalities. I chaired another goal group meeting at 7 p.m. And at 8 o'clock, I actually had some quite interesting conversations with news editors. I rang news editors from the main broadcasters and I said to them, do you still want us to actually keep putting people up for interview and facilities? Or do you want us to stop? I had a lot of tired people on my hands. And their response, without question, was, if you agreed not to put anybody up until tomorrow morning, unless something happened, that would really help us, because we could regroup. We've got so much unused material in the can, we could actually start to play that out. So we made that decision. No more facilities until 7 o'clock the following morning, unless something happened. This was now headline news around the world. And in the days after 7/7, we put into place a very effective communication strategy, series of press briefings, press conferences, interviews, and more meetings of the Gold Communications Group. But there's no doubt that social media has defined the boundaries. Would the authorities be able to deal with an incident like that now? They would have a good go, don't get me wrong, but the challenges that social media has brought are considerable. No, Twitter would go into overdrive. There's no doubt about that. Information would be out there even before the first emergency services were on the scene. This is just some examples of the Apollo Theatre collapse, where you've actually got people tweeting from the auditorium about what's going on. We saw from Alton Towers recently, again, people that were there, the first thing they do is take to their mobile phones and start tweeting information out. From an organisation's perspective, trying to manage that brings such major challenges, because by the time you've written your first statement, the world has moved on. Things have developed. Images, again, will be another problem. The only way we could get images out into the public domain in 2005 was to attach them to an email and send them to broadcasters. Didn't have any other mechanisms to actually share images. Now, you can upload images on various social media platforms. These were all images that were taken by members of the public using their camera phones in 2005. They were emailed to the media. The one at the bottom there, you can still see the passengers on the top of the bus after the bomb has gone off. The person by the telegraph pole is the bus driver. He has got out of his cab, gone round the back, and found the back half of his bus completely missing. We've now got the ability to stream live videos through Meerkat and Periscope. And again, that brings even greater challenges. You haven't got to upload the images. You can actually point your camera and broadcast images live. And how on earth do we try and tackle that? How do we cater for that? I don't know. I really don't know. But to me, this is the most worrying situation that we could confront in the future. We are dealing with a new breed of terrorists who exploit social media to the full. We've seen that. Who's to say in the future that you won't get the terrorist atrocities taking place? And to reinforce that terror, the terrorist groups will actually use social media, actually streaming images live of what's going on. Because that's their whole purpose. It's to bring fear and terror to a population. And again, to try and manage that sort of situation is significant. Brings great challenges that organisations are going to have to deal with and tackle. But the public will also turn to social media like never before. Picture on the right-hand side. Always remember that. 9/11, where there were images, posters, photographs being posted on the railings around the Twin Towers in New York. Would people do that now? Or would they take to social media? You're going to find that images of the missing are going to be posted on Facebook and other social media platforms really, really quickly. Because people will actually want answers. They're going to want to play a part. How do I find out if my mum, dad, husband, wife is alive, is missing? They want to do something. They want to be empowered. So they will take to social media. So the name of those unaccounted for will be circulating on Twitter really quickly, and there's a strong possibility that family and friends will hear the news about people who are missing or people who have died from social media first. And from a family liaison perspective, from a policing perspective for trying to support victims and their families, that also brings its own problems. I've just put together a tweet at the bottom here, how things might appear. Please find our loving husband, Father Stephen Wilson, who went to work yesterday morning and hasn't come home. If you see him, call that number. Great. That's the sort of thing we might be seeing that's been tweeted out. You might think that's all very well, very nice. That's great for the journalists. That's great for the media, because actually you've got a name of someone who's missing. You've got their photograph. But not only that, you've got a contact number straight into the family. So they can get hold of that person's family, interview them on the telephone or whatever, really, really quickly. Are we prepared for that? No, we're not. The police still expect people at times of disaster, when we've got fatalities, to pick up a telephone and ring a free phone number and report people missing. I'm not sure people are going to do that in the future. I think they will take to social and digital media platforms to actually help them find people who are unaccounted for. This was something that Google set up following the Boston bomb. 2 boxes. Really good, really clever idea. You go onto one box, I'm looking for someone, I have information about someone, hit that box, drop down menu, you fill in the form. Okay? Absolutely really good idea. Really helpful. Where does it fit into the official structures that exist? Where does it fit into the Police Casualty Bureau? Where does it fit into trying to manage casualties, manage the dead, the injured, the missing? The answer is it doesn't. Nowhere does that slot in to the official response. Google just decided to do that off their own back. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't stop that, but we need to make sure if things like that are happening, that it slots together. Otherwise, we are going to have real problems. Failing to plan is planning to fail. So how are we going to tackle this? Well, you need a clear strategy and plans in place. Where possible, they should be developed around PESCO, so paid, earned, owned and shared communications. And those plans need to be flexible. I'm asked to go into different organisations to carry out reviews on crisis communications. My first question to them is, can I see your crisis communications plan? Oh yeah, I'll just get it for you. Get it off the shelf, and they blow off the dust. Well, actually, you know what? Your plans are not fit for purpose if you had to do that. Crisis communication plans should be reviewed every 6 months. If they're not, they will not be fit for purpose. Because the world, the digital age, is moving at such a rate, What you have in your plans that was written 3 years ago will now be completely out of date if something happens tomorrow. So what steps can we take to successful crisis social media? Well, timing is everything. Silence is not an option. At the height of a disaster, updates should be sent out every 10 minutes. Own the conversation. Hashtag it. Minimise the impact. Use social media to reassure challenge inaccuracies. Saying sorry is not an admission of liability. I get really frustrated when I talk to organisations and they say, we can't say sorry because we're admitting liability. No, you're not. There is no legal case where actually by saying sorry, you have admitted liability. So if we've done something wrong, apologise. Try to stick to one designated source for information. So if you are using different social media platforms, just use one and signpost people to that from the other social and digital media platforms that you are using. Tell people what they should do, call to action, and direct people to other reliable sources of information. Don't lash out. There's a I think we all do this sometimes, that knee-jerk reaction to respond to somebody who's put something controversial or something you're unhappy with on social media. Don't do that. Remember the rule of three. Engagement, 3 conversations is fine. More than 3 is actually an argument. All right? So don't get into a tit for tat. Create a release valve. On your social media platforms, create a release valve where people can actually share their frustrations, their concerns, where they can actually upload how they feel, those feelings. That will help you know what people are thinking, what people want answers to, and debrief and lessons learned. Just going to leave you with some facts and figures from the 7th of July. The Press Bureau, over 10 days, dealt with 8,000 media inquiries. 27 updates were sent out on the 7th of July alone. We did 25 press conferences, briefings, almost 400 one-to-one interviews. There were 1.5 million hits on the website. The media received 10,000 mobile telephone images on the morning of the 7th of July. Okay. At peak times, the BBC web page, news page was being requested 40,000 times per second. That doesn't include social media. Social media did not exist in 2005. Is that going to make things easier, or is it going to make things worse? I don't know. Let's not forget the reality of the London bombings. It wasn't about protecting the brand or protecting the reputation. 52 people went out to work or college that morning. 52 people went out on that brilliant summer's day. 52 people didn't come home. They were murdered on the streets of the capital. Unfortunately, the reality of a further terrorist attack in the United Kingdom is quite significant. It hasn't gone away. What we've got to make sure is that if and when it does happen, that we have the best, reliable and capable plans to deal with not only the news media, but social media as well. If we're not, we will let people down. That's the end of my presentation. I hope you found it useful. I haven't got time to take questions now, but I'll be here over lunch, so if you want to ask me anything, then I'm happy to have a chat with you. But thank you very much.